think, as we look specifically with that offensive line group, good players, but also very versatile. And particularly like with Elton and Titus, both of those guys are players who can, play at a quality starting level at multiple positions across the offensive line. And that's super helpful because it really is a war of attrition with that position group. I think something like we looked at it as either 23 or 24 teams last year played less than 50% with their starting five. Of course, we were one of them. And so to have that resiliency built into a position group where you have guys that can start all across the line of scrimmage, it's really important, in addition to the flexibility it gives you going into the draft.
So where are you playing Elton Jenkins?
Yeah, so it's TBD. He's honestly he can play center, he can play guard. That's something that we're going to sort out as we get at least a little bit further through the acquisition season. This is a guy who's played, starting level snaps, left tackle, right tackle, left guard, center. He can really do it all. We would view him more as an interior player. That is what we think is more his natural home. Whether it's center or whether it's guard, we'll work through that as we put together the position group this spring.
As you talk about that versatility piece, how important is that going to be for how you guys approach potentially drafting and looking at alignment in the draft as well?
Yeah, it gives flexibility. That's probably the biggest thing. We feel good if we had to line up and play today that we could, with that group of linemen. But it certainly doesn't pigeonhole you into anything as you get to draft weekend.
Well, who would be your center today?
Today, hard to say. Honestly, it really depends on the competition at really one of the other guard spots opposite Zion. Obviously, we have Elton. We re-signed Tevin. Zach and Luke, they're guys that are going to have greater opportunity now that those vets are gone. So it's really we would just be looking for the best pairing. Yeah.
Finish that up. So Zach finished playing center. Is he earmarked? Competed center?
You mean Luke? Do you mean Luke? Zach really finished playing guard for us. You mean Luke finished playing center for Opposite?
Well, Luke got hurt in the Cincy game, and Zach finished center.
Zach's more natural position is guard. He can do
So
do
he's not
both,
a
but
competitor for center.
I would say this. Well, he can do both. We think his more natural position is guard. Is that fair enough to say? Yeah.
Andrew, since this was such a hot topic over the last few days or so, can you address what was the impetus behind the Myles Garrett contract modifications, and then also, of course, the corollary to that is everybody thinks you're going to trade him. So if you could talk about those two issues.
Yeah. So I think you guys know, standard practice, I don't comment on player contracts. I guess probably the easiest thing to say is if we wanted to trade Myles, we wouldn't have needed to make a contract adjustment, so it doesn't have anything to do with that.
Why did you do it?
So again, I don't comment on player contracts. So I understand the question and the interest, but it's just something that we've always felt not to comment on player contracts or contract management strategy.
So can you state unequivocally that you're not trading Myles Garrett?
I'd say this, Mary Kay. Myles is a career Brown. He is one of the faces of our organization. I think we've been very clear, both past and present, in terms of our dealings with that. So I understand all the questions. I'll be honest, I don't really want to waste a ton more breath on the topic. Yeah.
Sure, but you feel like you guys are in a good spot with Myles?
We do. Yeah.
As it pertains to the quarterback position, is it just safe to assume that the incumbents in the current room will be competing for the starting position, or when you look to add a potential fourth quarterback, would you prefer the draft? Would you prefer signing a vet in free agency? How are you kind of looking at the quarterback room as it stands?
Yeah, I'd say, Daniel, that you always want to be flexible because you don't know how circumstances change or what opportunities come your way. Our lean would be, if we do add someone to the quarterback room, it would be someone who's a younger player most likely. But I can't state that definitively because I don't know what the next couple of weeks will hold. Anyone that we bring in at any spot on the roster, our thought is that they are competing. They're competing to play. They have something that we like in their skill set, and our expectation would be for them to work hard.
And Andrew, with regards to the SHEDEUR versus Deshaun specifically, how much do you balance short-term with long-term, knowing that team control with SHEDEUR goes well beyond 26, whereas Deshaun, there is sort of another hurdle that it creates.
Yeah, I think we're probably just more focused on performance and best players. Certainly, time horizon factors into that. But just with any veteran player, there's no rule against extending the player's contract if they perform and they do well. So I wouldn't necessarily box it into any one approach. It really will be performance based.
Andrew, I understand how you value Miles. Everyone knows he's the best player in the league. You have the team to consider too. So why don't you think you could get out of this hole by using your greatest asset? Just collect picks.
Yeah, we'll always do what we think is in the best interest of the organization. We really like our core. I think as we look at the team, we have an elite young defense. We have a really, rebuilt offensive line. We have 9 picks this upcoming draft, and I think 7 are in the top 150. 3 in the top 40. We have a good offensive young core that we brought in last year. And honestly, as we saw last year, there are more than one way to generate assets in the NFL. So we'll always do what's best for the organization, but we feel really good about our roster right now as we head to the draft.
At the combine, you kind of were 50-50. I mean, it almost seemed like Deshaun and SHEDEUR, you were totally fine with either one of them if it worked out that one of them were the starter. Is that still where you stand right now? Does it sort of still seem like they each have an equal opportunity to win the starting job?
Yeah, I'd say as we sit here on March 29th, and nobody has touched the grass, nobody has really worked with our coaching staff. I wouldn't handicap it for anyone. I think everyone in that room deserves opportunity, and so we'll certainly know a lot more as we get to the spring. We'll know even more as we get to camp. But I think honestly, we wouldn't be doing the right thing for the team. We wouldn't be doing the right thing for that position. If we didn't go in with it eyes wide open.
What was the impetus to expanding the scope on trading draft picks? Do you see the reaction to it, and do you expect it to pass?
Yeah, so Daniel, in terms of the impetus, we've largely been believers in, easing restrictions in terms of how teams can use their resources. So this is in a similar vein, and really just giving more flexibility to teams in terms of volume and creativity of transactions. As we look at it, our league relative to the other major leagues, basketball you can trade, pick 7 years out. Hockey, I don't think there's any limitation. Obviously, baseball is the most restrictive that you can't trade picks at all. To us, 3 years is really probably more of an arbitrary, marker in terms of how far out you can, deploy your future assets. Honestly, Daniel, I think a lot of the perhaps resistance is this idea that a desperate general manager, a desperate head coach could leverage a team's future irresponsibly. I think that's a little bit more rooted in fear than reality, though, and I think for 2 reasons. I think number one, there is always ownership oversight for every franchise. But 2, probably the bigger point, if you look back over the last 10 years, I think there have been 27 trades that have included a pick 3 years out, and of those 27, only 3 have included a first rounder, and only another 4 have included even day 2 picks. So I don't think you're all of a sudden going to see this trend where people are trading picks 4 to 5 years out. I think those are very rare circumstances, but what it does do is it gives you more creative alternatives for, I would say, maybe less signature or less aggressive moves because of how you want to balance the discounting of present versus future assets.
Is there a rigid rule now? There seems to be confusion. Is it an NFL rule you can only trade 3 years out, or is it more of an under?
No, it's a rule. Yeah, that's a rule.
So if you were the receiving GM of a trade, how do you devalue a pick 3 years in advance?
Yeah, so
number one.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Terry. So traditionally, let me back up. Every team probably has their own methodology. Probably the traditional discounting is you discount it around. Now there will be varying opinions of if that's an effective valuation of future picks, but I think that's what actually creates some unique transactional opportunities because teams will value present versus future picks much differently, and it just gives you more opportunities for creative solutions that benefit both sides.
When you talk about the quarterback situation, how realistic is it that you add somebody? You said it would probably be a younger guy.
Mm-hmm.
How realistic is it that you would add somebody that would actually come in here and compete for the starting job? And then the corollary to that is just how realistic is it that you would draft Ty Simpson at some point?
Yeah, so I guess I'll start with the first question. I think it's wholly realistic, Mary Kay. In terms of them competing for their starting job, anyone we bring in, we want to compete. But a large part of that will be, for any young player, will depend on their acclimation to the NFL and their readiness to play. And that's really done on a case-by-case basis. In terms of Ty specifically, I think you can understand we wouldn't necessarily comment on specific prospects. I've spent time with Ty. I think that's obvious, and we'll continue to do so. But I think he has a bright NFL future.
Last year, you were very visible at the quarterback pro days.
Mm-hmm.
This year, you're not. Why?
I think just every year is unique, Tony. Both where you're picking, the particular class, the access that you have, particular individuals, but we also do have a month out for the draft, so there still is a lot of work to do.
Yeah, the pro days are done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
the end.
Yeah. So, Tony, I think actually like last year, most of our trips were actually privates as opposed to the pro days. So I wouldn't say that's the only touch point.
Yeah, but you went to the pro days and then you stayed over for the visits.
So that's actually not true.
That's not.
Yeah. Yeah,
Well,
we did for
certainly
we did for
we're
sure.
at Travis Hunter's and SHEDEUR.
Mm-hmm. That was the only one.
Obviously, still no official answer from Joel in terms of what his decision is going to be. Do you guys feel you kind of have to operate from a place of where you can't bank on him coming back necessarily?
Yeah, I think that's fair. Joel's going to take the time that he needs to, make the decision for the next step in his career, and he should, right? It's a pretty big life decision for him. I don't think that we can operate under the assumption that he's absolutely coming back, because he hasn't said that's the case, and I do think that there's a little bit of an indefinite time period in terms of where he's going to make that decision, because it's a major one for a person. We respect that and can appreciate it.
But is the door open? Do you still want him back, given, you guys obviously let the dead money kind of accelerate onto your cap this year. So, and there might have been ways you could have maybe maneuvered that if you could have done it differently. So is it still like an open door for him to?
Yeah, I'd say the door is always open for good players, and certainly players who've done as much as what Joel has for the organization. But ultimately it's his decision in terms of how he wants to navigate things going forward.
You hold pick 6, and externally everybody's guessing on 2 to 5. Are you guys guessing too?
You mean
who's going
I
where?
got you.
Yeah.
So as we get into April, Zach, we'll do a lot of scenario planning, and we'll get into those exercises. I'd say right now we're still more towards the end of the evaluation phase. Especially as the pro days die down, the privates die down. A little bit of touch-up film work, but here over the next month we'll get into that more heavily.
Who makes the call to quarterback? Is it an organizational decision, or is that Todd's call strictly?
In terms of who
Starter.
that's always been the head coach's decision. Yeah, whoever is playing on the field, that's always the head coach's decision. Yeah.
Andrew, what's going on at wide receiver so far? You've just added a return specialist.
Yeah,
Basically.
I'd say that we have a group of individuals that we like internally, that we're excited to see as they come back into the offseason program. I would imagine that at some point in the offseason we'll add some external talent, but like I said, we're March 29th. We've got probably another 5 months in the heaviest period of the acquisition season, so we'll see where it goes.
How aggressively did you pursue veteran wide receivers and even veteran quarterbacks, and maybe why or why not did you pursue it aggressively?
I would not necessarily go into those details, Daniel, although I understand the interest. I'd say this, our focus primarily was on the offensive line, obviously, going into free agency, while still maintaining an opportunistic mindset at some of the other spots. I think the great thing about the NFL is you have a number of different spigots you could turn on in terms of player acquisition, whether it's the draft, whether it's free agency, whether it's the trade market. And so it's about pulling those levers at the right time.
Specifically about SHEDEUR, you had mentioned at the end of the season, and Todd has mentioned that he still has a long way to go. How far does he have to go to get to the point where you guys would feel comfortable putting the season in his hands right from the start?
Yeah, I think that's a little bit TBD, Mary Kay, because I think all of our guys coming in, they're going to learn a new offensive system. We're going to have a fair amount of turnover on that side of the ball. They'll have new teammates to learn, which is why the spring will be really important. For the guys that are at the offseason program, for us to really get a sense of their progress year over year. But he's been working really hard. I would expect him to take a step forward, and we'll deal with that kind of week by week and month by month.
You said you prefer a younger fourth quarterback. Does that mean draft pick only or a young veteran?
Oh, I wouldn't say. I would not. I wouldn't rule out any method of acquisition.
What would an 18th game being added mean to your job, and how would you view that happens?
I'll be honest, Zach. I don't think it would have a huge difference, other than I'd probably be most curious how injury rates change more than anything. Like, I could see a world where at certain positions maybe it changes your approach for depth, but I'd also imagine that 18th game would come with some type of trade-off, whether it's a bye week or less preseason games or things like that. But in terms of, I guess, maybe the fundamental aspects of roster building, I don't think it would have a major impact.
So along those lines, but figure out how I want to ask this, kind of open it. You guys have had to play 12 quarterbacks in 3 years. Mm-hmm. League-wide, I think it was 62 last year and 59 the year before that. Mm-hmm. It's a wild number. Is that inevitable? Is that something that can be fixed? Like, just what's your thoughts on all of those quarterbacks playing? And does it change your planning? Does it have to change your planning?
No, I'd say this. I think probably you could put it in two different buckets, like durability versus performance at that position. And part of it is, like, if you're turning over room, you're probably going to have a little bit more opportunity, or at least more, like, not even just relative to quarterbacks. I do think the durability component is real, because that's a very physically and mentally demanding position in our sport, especially as, like, D linemen become that much bigger, that much faster, that much stronger, and it's a big reason that we believed in carrying 3, because it is a very long season. I don't see that part changing anytime soon.
Coming off about the durability, but to the offensive line more specifically, when you kind of gone back and looked at the last 3 years, the number of, have you adjusted anything based off of kind of re-examining the last 3 years? Are the injuries? What has kind of led to it? And kind of what have you guys learned from, studying the amount of turnover you guys have had on the line?
Yeah, so I think number one, it's fairly prevalent across the league. Like, probably keeping a position group of 5 players all on the field the whole season is probably fairly unrealistic. That's one thing that we've learned. 2, I think if you look at where we were, take out the 25 season, but 24-23 in terms of our injury rates, it's a big reason that we made some of the changes that we did in the health and performance basis, and we really started to see those returns, this year in terms of keeping those guys on the field. To that group specifically, I think probably in this past year, really a big part of it was, that group really did age out for us, and we understood that we were going in with a little bit of an older group there. I do think that as we turn over that room, I think or hope that some of that will take care of itself, in addition to some of the changes that we've made in downstairs in the health and performance spaces.
Just following up real quick, but you sort of look at, like, DeLon's was a fluke, see a lot of them as kind of flukish the way they happen.
I think it's a combination of both. Like, I think it's a combination of guys who you understand, like, you're going to have guys on your roster that have some type of medical history. Like, you're not going to build a team of unfortunately all durable guys. Some certainly are flukes, in the sense of, hey, is it a contact injury? Does someone get thrown to somebody's knees or legs? And some of it may be like, hey, guys, their injury risk does change as their career progresses, whether it's because of their age or because of previous injuries. So I'd like to sit here and say it's like, hey, it's just one thing and then it's an easy cure-all, but I think that would be unfair to say.
I think a year ago it was at the owners' meetings where the trade from 2 to 5 really kind of started to come about with James Gladstone. A year later, how do you reflect